Okay. So today we're going to talk about the present tense and just kind of review the present tense, le temps présent. So we're going to start by asking you to answer the question that's going to pop up now about a review of present tense endings. And now we're going to start reviewing based on each type of verb. So we're going to start with ER verbs. Mademoiselle Heller, do you want to review for us how to conjugate ER verbs in the present tense?
Bien sûr. So when you have an ER verb, we know that it means like to whatever that verb, so like to eat, to run. So to conjugate it, you have to first take off the ER, that's the ending. And then you have to put on a new ending that changes with each different subject. So for je travaille, we've added an E back on. And then tu travailles is ES, il travaille is an E again, nous travaillons is ONS, vous travaillez ends with EZ, and il travaille is ENT.
Excellent. And I really like that you pronounced, the je to il and il plural forms all the same, because that S and that ENT are silent in the pronunciation. And that's super important.
Yeah, I think almost what you were going to say was, pronounce versus conjugate. They're conjugated differently, but they're actually pronounced the same. So.
Exactly. Yes. So there's a second type of ER verb, which are called stem changing verbs. And sometimes we call them boot verbs, because if you look at what's yellowed here, it kind of looks like a boot. Abstract, but regardless. So for those, they have a spelling change in the je to il and il plural forms. And again, it's for reasons of pronunciation, to keep their pronunciation consistent with each other. Some verbs go E to E accent grave or E accent aigu to E accent grave. Other verbs double the final consonant. There's not really a rhyme or reason as to what type of verb does which rule. It's really just memorizing. But yeah. So if you look at these, the verb acheter, j'achète, tu achètes, il achète, nous achetons, vous achetez, elles achètent. So that's kind of you can hear the difference in pronunciation on those.
Yeah, for the new and vous form, it almost sounds like there is no letter E between the CH and the T. Like it
exactly
disappears if you don't have the accent.
Yep. So verbs that use the E accent grave spelling change are mener, préférer, espérer. Important to note, it's always the final E before the ending that changes. And then verbs that double the consonant are verbs like jeter and appeler, which again, it's that final consonant that changes or doubles.
And Madame, what does mener mean?
Mener means to lead someone somewhere.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
And I know the words amener and like amener, which is like to bring a person somewhere or to take a person somewhere. Do they have the same?
They do. Any verb that ends with mener is going to have the same spelling change.
Oh, okay. And what about espérer? What's that mean again?
Espérer means to hope.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Oh?
Oui.
Okay. So next we come to IR verbs. And there are two types of ER verbs, there are two types of IR verbs. So the first is what we consider the regular IR verbs, or they're also sometimes called the IR-ISS verbs, because if you look at the plural forms, we add ISS there. Similar to ER verbs, we're going to drop the IR and then add the endings. IS, ISIT, ISSONS, ISSEZ, ISSENT. So, Mademoiselle, do you want to go through the pronunciation of finir for us?
Yeah, sure. So I would pronounce it as je finis, tu finis, il finit, and then nous finissons, vous finissez, and ils finissent.
Excellent. Très bien. Some common verbs that are conjugated like finir as regular IR verbs are choisir, réussir. Mademoiselle, can you think of any others?
Oh man, putting me on the spot. On the spot, I'm having a blank. I'm drawing a blank for real.
Moi aussi. So those are the common ones.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the second type of IR verb is a little different. If you want to take a look at that, mademoiselle, and tell me what you notice.
Well, a similarity, I know you just said differences, but a similarity that I see is that the je and the tu and the il form for the first kind of IR verbs we talked about, and then this second type, like those endings are the same. It's just like s, and t. So that would help me know how to conjugate it. Like the je form will end with an s no matter what kind of verb this is. Um, and then I noticed that for like the nu and vu and il plural forms, that the first kind of IR verbs we talked about, we add the ISS before we add the regular endings. Whereas for the second type, we don't have to add an ISS. So I probably would have thought that this was nous sortissons if we didn't have these notes, but I can see here, but that's not correct, and it's nous sortons.
Correct. So the way that I kind of explain these is that I say for the singular forms, je, tu, and il singular, we drop the last three letters. So for sortir or partir, we drop the TIR. For dormir, we drop the MIR, and we add SST. And then for the nu, vu, and il plural forms, we put that final consonant back on and add the same endings that we used for ER verbs. So ONS, EZ, ENT.
Okay.
And one other verb of this type that's not on here is servir.
Oh, servir. Okay.
Yes. Ça va?
Oui, ça va pour moi.
Okay. Next, we have RE verbs. So as you remember from your French last year or the year before, three types of regular verbs, ER, IR, and now RE. So the rule for RE verbs, you drop the RE, you add SS nothing, ONS, EZ, ENT. Mademoiselle, do you want to run through the pronunciation of these for us?
Sure thing. I have je vends, tu vends, il vend, nous vendons, vous vendez, and il vend.
Excellent, très bien. Other common RE verbs, vendre, attendre, répondre. Can you think of any others, mademoiselle?
Well, it's interesting because I can think of some others, but they actually are a little bit irregular, so I don't really want to mention them right here.
All right, perfect. Before we move on to some irregular verbs, which we're going to get to momentarily, we want to take a minute to remind you about reflexive verbs. And so a reflexive verb is a verb that starts with the pronoun se, and it indicates that the subject does the action to him or herself, okay? And they're conjugated, like se coucher is conjugated just like coucher, except you change that se there to match your subject pronoun. So je me couche, tu te couches, elle se couche, nous nous couchons, vous vous couchez, il se couche. Sans dormir, you would conjugate like dormir and change the pronoun. Questions about that?
No, that makes sense. It's usually just tricky to remember to change the se to match it with the subject. Sometimes I write je se couche instead of je me couche.
Oui, absolument.
Yeah.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about some common irregular verbs. Here we've got a nice RE verb. I'm sure you were thinking about prendre on the last slide.
Prendre and comprendre were the two that popped into my head. So it's
Yep.
nice to see you here.
So any verb that ends with prendre is going to be conjugated like prendre, which prendre is a little different. For the singular form, we drop the RE and add SS nothing, just like a regular RE verb. For the plural form, we have to drop the DRE and add ONS EZ, and then double the N, ENT.
Yeah.
There's a lot to remember with prandra.
It's kind of tricky. I don't really know how to remember this other than to, practice it. And really, like the eel plural form is the trickiest one for
Yes, agreed.
me. Mhm.
The next is verbs like venir, another one that we just have to memorize. You want to conjugate it like an IR verb, but it's actually quite irregular. So, je viens, tu viens, il vient, nous venons, vous venez, elles viennent.
Mhm.
Again, in the EL plural form, we have to double that consonant.
Yeah. And I see the list of verbs below that chart: venir, revenir, devenir. I know that revenir is to come back, and devenir is to become something.
Mm-hmm.
Like I became a doctor. But what about like tenir and maintenir and obtenir?
Sure. Maintenir and obtenir are cognates. Okay, so maintenir is like to maintain,
Oh, sure.
and obtenir is to obtain or to get something. Tenir means to hold.
Oh, okay.
I kind of remember that because if you maintain something, you're holding on to whatever that is.
Sure. And if you obtain something, you're getting it, and you can hold it.
Exactly. Oui.
Okay.
Next, we have our four most common irregular verbs, which really you should know by now. um, aller, avoir, être, faire. They're pretty self-explanatory. Important to note all the EO plural forms for these four end with ONT instead of ENT. So vont, on, sont, font.
I like
And
that they
then we have to be careful with the vous form of être and faire. So vous êtes and vous faites.
Mhm.
Nous sommes for être. Other than that, I think they're pretty follow some sort of pattern.
Yeah, I think they're fairly straightforward and
Yep.
that we know them pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So next we've got verb pouvoir and vouloir.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So these verbs, I don't know how to explain them really. They follow similar patterns, only with, that they change their consonants according to their infinitives. So, je peux, je veux, tu peux, tu veux, il peut, il veut, nous pouvons, nous voulons. Important to notice that goes back to an OU in the new and the vous forms. So vous pouvez, vous voulez. And then for the il plural form, it goes back to the EU again. Ils peuvent, ils veulent.
Yeah, and these ones are tricky for me too. I know il peuvent is really hard to say, that il plural form.
Yes.
And sometimes when I say it, I almost sound like I'm saying the new form if I try to pronounce all the letters, like il pouvant, like, and
Right.
that's gotten me confused before. But I just got to remember that, like the other third person, the il plural, that you don't say like the last letters when you're pronouncing it.
Right. It's also, I think it's important to point out that typically the il plural form follows a more similar pattern to je, tu, and il singular than to nous and vous, even though it's on that side of the chart.
Yeah, which goes back to all the boot stuff we were talking about. And
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So we also have verbs like boire and devoir. Again, these you've seen before. Just a little review. So je bois, tu bois, il boit, nous buvons, vous buvez, ils boivent. Again, similar pattern for il plural as il, tu, and je. Same thing with devoir. Okay, je dois, tu dois, il doit, nous devons, vous devez, ils doivent. One thing we don't want to see is je devoir. We've seen that before. So just be careful of that. That's something that people frequently make a mistake on.
Yeah.
And recevoir and voir. Okay, recevoir is one that gives people a lot of trouble. Do you want to go over that one, Mademoiselle Heller?
Yeah. So when you see that letter C with the foot, the cedille, it means that the letter C has to be pronounced like an S. So, and it even kind of looks more like an S now. So we have je reçois, tu reçois, il reçoit, nous recevons, vous recevez, and ils reçoivent as the pronunciations. And then voir, je vois, tu vois, il voit, nous voyons, vous voyez, il voit.
Wait.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, we've got dear, écrire, and lire, which I know you've also seen these before. To say, to write, to read. They follow similar patterns as each other, with the exception of vous dites. And écrire uses a V rather than an S, but the patterns are similar.
Yeah. And it's actually really funny. It's important to remember that the infinitive is écrire because we will say like nous écrivons and vous écrivez, and then sometimes think that like écrivez is an ER verb. So we want to be careful because it's écrire.
Yes. So this is the end of the slideshow, but before we actually leave, Mademoiselle Heller and I wanted to show you a nice little trick on word reference. So I'm going to go there for you. Word reference will conjugate verbs for you if you are unsure of how to conjugate them. So what you're going to do is go up to verb conjugator and click on French. And then they always start with parler because it's a common, easy ER verb, but you can type any verb into this box, any French verb. How about you give me an example, Mademoiselle?
What if I don't know how to conjugate surprendre?
Et voilà.
Ah, super.
And so this gives you the verb in all the different French tenses. So some of these we haven't even talked about or learned before, but it's all there. So it's a super, super useful tool.
Yeah, and I really like how like you can scroll all the way down to the bottom and it can show you like the imperative, the command form.
Yep.
And I like how there's the key that says what the blue letters mean versus red letters if there are any. And if you scroll back up, I also really like that on the left hand column, it shows you a list of other verbs that behave this way if it happens to behave strangely or differently. And
absolutely.
So, surprendre is like prendre, comprendre, apprendre, which is why I thought of it.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Oui, à tout à l'heure.
Au revoir. I can't stop it.
Can't stop the beat?
No, can't stop the beat. I lost my menu.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Trapped in the aurora borealis.